Lots of good energy. It's so good to be here with you all on this Wednesday night. And Lee got called into work at the last minute, so he messaged and said he wasn't sure if he'd be here.
Number 12, He's My King. After the song, we'll have our opening prayer. All day long of Jesus I am singing. He my song of joy will ever be. All the while He keeps my heart bells ringing. For His love is everything to me. He's my King, and oh, I dearly love Him. He's my King, no other is above Him. All day long, in raptured praise I sing. He's my Savior, He's my King. Streams of love around my soul are flowing. From His heart, love's everlasting spring. That is why my faith in Him I'm showing. That is why an endless song I sing. He's my King, and oh, I dearly love Him. He's my King, no other is above Him. All day long, in raptured praise I sing. He's my Savior, He's my King.
trust His saving grace, going home to sing and tell His story in the blessed sunshine of His face. He's my King, and oh, I dearly love Him. He's my King, no other is above Him. All day long, in raptured praise I sing. He's my Savior, He's my King.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and allowing us to come here tonight. Thank you for all the blessings you have given us. Let's always remember that all good things come from you. Please be with those who are sick and those who are taking care of them. Thank you for your Son and his sacrifice for us. In Jesus' name, amen.
$5.89. 589. As the deer. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. If you'd like to mark in your songbook, 315 will be the invitation song. 315. And before that, we'll sing 416. Do all in the name of the Lord. 416. If you'd like to, let's stand. Whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord. Do not in name of man or creed, do all in the name of the Lord. Do all in His name, do all in the name of the Lord. In word or deed, as God decreed, do all in the name of the Lord. Be not deceived by worldly greed, do all in the name of the Lord. The Spirit says in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord. Do all in His name, do all in the name of the Lord. In word or deed, as God decreed, do all in the name of the Lord. till toils and labors here are done. Do all in the name of the Lord. Dear Christian friends, if you be one, do all in the name of the Lord. Do all in His name. Do all in the name of the Lord. In word or deed, as God decreed, do all in the name of the Lord.
A few weeks ago, Sharon and I had the opportunity to go see a Kenny Chesney concert. And appearing with Kenny Chesney was Zach Brown and a couple of other acts. I think it was a total of 4 acts altogether. And it was at the Nissan Stadium in Nashville. It was the 1st of August. It was hot. It was long. It was expensive. But we enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed the Zach Brown band. I've heard his songs, but I never have seen him perform. And he was very good to me at getting the crowd involved. And he told us some of the works that he does with the charities down in Georgia, and with some of the other things that he does. And he's a big veteran supporter. And one of his songs is "May Freedom Fly Forever, Let It Ring." And he started singing that song, and of course the crowd was getting in a frenzy, and I was getting all excited. And all of a sudden, they bring a wounded veteran out on the stage. Whew, that was tough. The feeling of patriotism, the feeling of volunteerism, the feeling of love that he showed for his country. You know, it was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get this way. But from all that Zach Brown said while he was on stage, and the things I read after that, and I don't know everything about him, so there may be a lot more bad about him than there is good. So I'm just telling you from Mickey's perspective that he really appreciates the people who serve our country. And he doesn't turn his back on them. And he does what he can for them. So I didn't feel like it was an exhibition that he brought this veteran out and got the crowd in a frenzy. And it was more of a sense of patriotism. As an American. And, you know, I put all those thoughts in perspective. And I think, you know, I enjoyed the concert, so let me preface that by saying that. But to see the hundreds of thousands of people, I'm not going to tell you it's like a Trump event where there's millions of people there. It was a lot of people there, and it was crowded, and it was hot, and it was long. I've already told you all that, and I was thinking, man, just think. If we could win people for Christ like this, would they be willing to come when it's hot? Would they be willing to give lots of money? How much good could we do for Christ? And we can do that. We can do that. But like Brother Eric said, it's up to the people. It's up to their hearts. But we can preach that message. You know, the volunteer, what you saw the emotion go through me about volunteerism. Do I cry for Christ like that? Do I cry for the man who died on the cross for me like that? Do I do everything within my full being to do my part in spreading the borders of the kingdom? Do I appreciate what Jesus did for me? Do I show my appreciation for what Jesus did for me? With all that in mind, let's turn to Luke chapter 17, beginning in verse 11. On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers, who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. They were crying out for help. They knew Jesus could help them. And when he saw them, he said to them, Go and show yourselves to the priest. And as they went, they were cleansed. They didn't even make it to the priest, according to what I'm reading here. On the road to seeing the priest, as Jesus has commanded them, they were cleansed. And then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. And we know what the Samaritans were at this time in relationship with the Jews. And Jesus is going to go into that a little bit. The only person of the 10 to turn back was a Samaritan to show his appreciation for Jesus. Then Jesus answered, Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except for this foreigner? That's how Jesus classified the Samaritan. This person who's a foreigner, he's the only one that showed appreciation for what had been done for him. And he said to him, Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you whole. So that's after that concert, that's how I evaluated myself. The next morning we got up and we went to worship with a group of Christians in the Brentwood area. And the building wasn't anywhere near capacity. The singing was pretty good. The message was excellent. And I think I told the preacher I was going to let the elders know about. He's a new guy that's moving in from the Memphis area. And he and his wife are praying. I can't remember his name right off the top of my head.
Tim Ruffin.
Huh?
Tim Ruffin.
That's it, Tim Ruffin. Yep. And his message was excellent. And I was encouraged. And I was uplifted. And I was grateful to God for what, after his message, for what he preached to me. So, as we go through our lives, let us think about how we can encourage those who need courage. How we can uplift those who need to be uplifted. You guys help me all the time, I'm telling you. When I get ill about something, when I probably want to do things that I shouldn't say or do because somebody's upset me, I'd say, what would someone here at this congregation do about that? And that sort of settles me down. That and the pictures of my grandchildren. That settles me down. Puts life in perspective for me. Because I know that there's a higher power out there. And as Brother Eric said in his lesson a few weeks ago, Donald Trump's not going to save us. Kamala's not going to save us. JFK didn't save us. Ronald Reagan didn't save us. God put these men and women in power. And God's going to be our judge in the last day. And God's going to be the ruling in the city that we want to live in after this life is over with. So live this life like you want to be in the next life. Give to God like you would give to make God the greatest thing in your life. Don't make comparisons to anything on this earth. Look to God for the strength and the trust. And be thankful that Jesus died for each and every one of us. And I'll leave you with one last thing. This morning on the way into work, listening to the radio, the guys, people give shout outs. And so this guy said, "Hey, can I give a shout out?" He said, "Sure, give a shout out." He said, "I want to give a shout out to Jesus." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I want to thank Jesus for everything he's done for me in my life. I want to thank Jesus for everything he's done for me in my life. I want to thank Jesus for forgiving me of the sins that I've committed, that are terrible, that have been against people, that have kept me from having the opportunity to live in heaven after this life is over. Jesus did that for each and every one of us. I can't drive that point any harder than that. Jesus did that. Remember that. Wear that right up here in the front. Be thankful that you're a child of God. And help those who need help. And seek out those who are weak. We can all do that. That's a part that we can all do. So if you're here tonight and you're subject to the invitation in any way, we beg you to come as we stand and as we sing.
Oh, do not let the world depart, and close thine eyes against the light. For sinner, harden not thy heart. Be saved, oh, tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Oh, why not tonight? Will thou be saved? Then why not tonight? Tomorrow's sun may never rise to bless thy long deluded sight. This is our time, oh then be wise. Be saved, oh, tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Oh, why not tonight? Will thou be saved? Then why not tonight? Our blessed Lord refuses none who would to him their souls unite. Believe, obey, the work is done. Be saved, oh, tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Oh, why not tonight? Will thou be saved? Then why not tonight?
We'll wrap up our study with the Gospel of John tonight because next week, Lord willing, we're going to start our fall series. And so it's going to be from the Psalms. Stephen Russell, I was Stephen Russell's going to be the first one up, and he's going to do a little overview lesson. So I asked everybody to pick out a psalm to speak on. And he said, "Can I do an overview?" I said, "Sure, I've never heard an overview of the Psalms." So he's only got 150 of them to survey. Maybe just be ready for a long night. No, I'm sure it'll be good. we're going to wrap up tonight. I'm a little sad because I've really enjoyed this. I love the Gospel of John, and it's been good. I kind of hate to get to the end of it, but we'll be in the last chapter. But first, let's go to Luke chapter 5. You ever watch one of those series of shows, and then you start a new episode, and it begins 6 months before? You know, it kind of backs up to tell you something that happened. Well, we're going to go about 3 years before John 21, about 3 years before where we have been in the resurrection, about 3 years prior. We're here in Luke chapter 5, and this is when Jesus is just about to call the disciples, and Peter is not yet a follower. I mean, he might have been a believer, but he wasn't yet one of the disciples. And so, would someone volunteer to read 1 through 11 of Luke chapter 5? Anyone? Evan, you got it? All right, 1 through 11.
On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boats to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him.
All right, so that began Peter's apprenticeship, right? That began his time following Jesus. He left behind everything and followed Jesus. And just for a few minutes here, thinking through roughly chronologically, what are some things that Peter experienced with Jesus over the next few years together? Just name some things. What's something Peter was part of?
He walked on the water.
Yeah. He saw Jesus coming, walking on the water. He said, "Lord, if it's you, command me to get out." And he did. What else did Peter experience?
Come off Malchus view.
Yeah. Now we're getting down to the crucifixion. In the garden, he said, Jesus said he was ready to die with him. And I think he kind of proved that when he started, they only had how many swords between them? 2. Luke tells they had 2 swords. And so they had a whole mob coming with torches, and Peter had one of those 2 swords, and he pulled it out and swung at the high priest's servant. What else did Peter experience with Jesus? Yes. Yeah, he was sitting there on the grass with 5,000 plus people when Jesus asked them where they could get, to give the people something to eat. And they said, "Lord, a whole lot of food wouldn't be enough for these people." Anything else? Peter was one of the 3 who was on the mount when he saw Jesus changed. And he saw Moses and Elijah appear with him. He was one of the 3. In fact, who else was with him? James and John, the same 2 brothers we just read in Luke 5, right? James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were partners with him in this fishing business before they started following Jesus. We could name a lot of things. Now, getting closer to the crucifixion, so after he swung his sword, what's another thing that Peter did? Yeah, he denied him 3 times. Cursed. Said, "I do not know the man." Then he made eye contact with Jesus, apparently, right? Jesus turned and looked at him. And what did Peter do? He went out and wept bitterly. And when Jesus was arisen and he appeared to the ladies, Jesus told them, "Go and tell Peter and the brothers that," actually the angel said, "Go tell Peter and the brothers that he is risen and he will appear to you," And so Jesus has appeared to them now. And, we can only imagine what kind of emotions Peter must have been feeling when he was there in the room and Jesus is alive and Jesus is back. And Jesus showed himself to all of them. And, but what was Peter's last interaction with Jesus? It was denying him. So I don't even know. It's hard to even imagine what kind of mixture of emotions he would have been feeling that Jesus is alive. This is wonderful. I mean, it's the best news ever. But Peter had failed in the biggest way possible. After he had told Jesus, even if they all fall away, I will never fall away. And he, not only did he fall away, but he cursed and denied that he ever knew who Jesus was. What use could Jesus possibly have for him now? So we open John 21, and I think that problem was still unresolved at this point because of what plays out in this chapter. I think Jesus has appeared to them a couple of times, at least a few times. And now in John 21, he's going to appear again. He appeared to them several times over the course of 40 days, we read elsewhere. So John 21 opens with Peter making a declaration. What does he say? Yeah, I'm going fishing. And what does everybody else say, which is about the most normal response to that? We're going to. So, I wonder what to make of this. I've thought about this quite a bit. What are some reasons Peter might have been going fishing? Let's name some reasons. Why is Peter going fishing? Yeah, that's what he knew, right? That's what he did all of his life until Jesus came along. That's what he knew. That's what he was. He was a fisherman. His world had been turned upside down. What else is he going to do? He knows how to fish, right? He's going to fish. Same thing? Somebody else? Yeah, as a fisherman, right? Is that a comforting idea? I want to go fishing. Yeah, probably so. I'm not a fisherman. I don't fish, but I know for a lot of people, that's probably they'd rather be doing that than pretty much anything else, right? If they could choose. Might have been something he enjoyed doing. What's a very practical reason maybe they went fishing?
Hungry?
Yeah, maybe they need something to eat, right? Like we go to the grocery store. Maybe they ever need some food, right? I mean, in a very, very real sense, they could have just been hungry. I mean, that could be a super practical reason. Do we know definitively why he goes fishing? We don't know, right? Because he just says, I'm going fishing. Was this Peter's kind of deciding, well, I must be, maybe I need to go back to fishing? Was he kind of going back to what he knew? Or was it just simply a matter of they needed to get some food? It was just a practical thing. He'd be right back. He's just going to catch it. I don't know. I don't know. If you try to put yourself in Peter's mind, it's easy to imagine that maybe he didn't know what his future was now, right? And I think that becomes relevant in the conversation that follows this, as Jesus reaffirms what his purpose is. I think Peter needed to be told again what his purpose was, and we'll get to that. I'm kind of jumping ahead. But I suspect that Peter was sort of lost about what now? Where now? What now? What's he supposed to do? And what he knew how to do was fish. And if he is going back to fishing, it's kind of a sad thing. Instead of being kind of like a comforting idea, it might be kind of a sad idea that maybe Peter just thought this is what I know how to do, and maybe he didn't know what he's supposed to do. Again, a lot of speculation, but I think it's interesting because it all leads into the conversation that's going to follow. Any other thoughts in just the setup to the whole scene? Okay, so they fish. And what happens? They didn't catch anything. In the morning, you may know the song. Along comes Jesus walking on the seashore. Something like that, right? Yes. Do we all need to do it? Am I the only one that knows this song? Yeah, am I doing it the wrong way? I fished all night and they caught no fish. Really? Nobody knows this song? Am I the only one? Okay, all right. We don't have to sing it. But in the morning, Jesus comes walking along the shore, right? And what does he say? This is like the most common fishing conversation ever, right? Y'all catching anything, right? Isn't that what everybody says? And what do they say? No, that's pretty common too, right? I think it's funny to me how, like, it's the same. And then what does he say? Try the other side, right? And they do. And what happens? Say it again.
He also said, you will have fish.
Oh.
Try the right side.
Okay. I missed that. Yes, you will find some. You will find some on the other side. Now, does that make any sense, really, from a realistic, practical world point of view, that there's no fish biting on the left of the boat and there's a bunch of fish on the right? I mean, probably not, right? I mean, it's miraculous because it would be really funny. I guess it's possible. There's a school of fish over here, and you're just on the wrong side of the boat. But clearly, this is a miracle, right? And so, who puts 2 and 2 together first? John. Isn't that interesting? John was there in Luke 5, remember? They've seen this before. John says, it's the Lord. They must not have been, it's like early morning, some guy's walking along the shore, asking, hey, y'all catching anything? It's not until this point that they're like, oh, and it's not because I think the sun had come up enough they could see him. It's because they know what this means, right? I mean, Jesus did this. They've seen this before. This is what Jesus does. What does Peter do? How does it describe what he does? Yeah. That's beautiful, isn't it? What do you do the first time? Anybody remember? In Luke 5. He saw the big catch of fish. Fell down on his face. Said, get away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. He was in the boat with Jesus. He couldn't get away. Jesus and Peter, the only 2 people in the boat. When he sees this fish coming in, he realized there's somebody special in the boat and he's not worthy to be with you. He didn't realize you're that, he didn't know that Jesus was that kind of person. So he suddenly is like aware and suddenly self-conscious and suddenly getting away and bowing down and saying, I'm not worthy. This time around, puts on his coat, throws himself in the sea. There was a night when Jesus came walking on the water and he said, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you. And he stepped on the water. He's not trying to walk on the water. He just throws himself in. He's about 100 yards out, I think it says. Manageable distance to swim. It's a very emotional saying, though, I think, if you'll agree if you think about it. So, verse 8, the other guys come with the ship, with the boats and the fish. They get out, and what's Jesus got prepared for them? Fire, yeah, fire. And breakfast, right? I don't know if I've ever had grilled fish for breakfast, but I bet it was good. The Lord made it. That's right. Probably the best grilled fish they'd ever had. Yeah, even Sarah would eat it. That's what she's not a pescatarian. She would eat that. So, Jesus says something very interesting in verse 10. What does he tell Peter to do? What does he say to do?
Bring him some of the fishes you just caught.
All right, let's think this through. Who goes and grabs them? Of course, Peter. Somebody's always going to go first. It's going to be Peter, right? So Peter's dragging this net full of how many fish? 150 large fish, I think, right? Probably heavy, probably struggling with it, right? And he's dragging this net up to where Jesus is. Agreed? Now, Jesus already got breakfast ready? That's what it says, right? He's already got breakfast ready. But he asked Peter to bring this net of fish closer. Jesus said then, come have breakfast. So what did he do with those fish? Seems to me they're still there flipping and flopping in the net. Y'all picturing the same thing I'm picturing? The breakfast is ready. The net's just kind of shimmering and flopping around. No one dared ask him, who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. So Jesus came and took the bread, gave it to them, so with the fish, and this was the third time he revealed himself to them after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus says to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, I believe, and I'm not the only one who thought this, I looked it up, and it's apparently, first of all, I wondered if the original was clearer than it is in English, but it's just as ambiguous in the Greek as it is in English. You don't get any extra insight in terms of what is Jesus asking from the Greek, from what I can tell. And people who comment on this say that, there's more than one way you could read the question. So let's think about three different ways that Jesus could be meaning. What could he mean with this question? So, do you love me more than these? What's one way that you could read that? What's one thing Jesus might have meant?
First thing you did was say, let's go fishing. Jesus said, do you love this more than me?
The fishing? Yeah. I was expecting that to be one of the last ones that people suggested, but that one is an interesting one. What in the context might point toward Jesus saying, do you love me more than these, talking about fishing? In the context, what kind of hints at that? Yeah. If you've got the scene in your mind, right? He didn't need those fish. He's already got the fish cooked. Why have Peter go drag that net full of fish up there and then just say, okay, here's some breakfast, sit down and eat, and then start asking this question, like what's the purpose of having him drag the fish up? Maybe he's reminding him or asking him, you got to make a choice here. In Luke chapter 5, they had an enormous catch of fish, so big the boats were sinking. They pulled them to shore, and Jesus said, come follow me. And what does it say? What was the last verse we read? They followed him, and it says they left everything and followed him. So as professional fishermen, they walked away from the catch of a lifetime. The boats were sinking, they were so full of fish. And Jesus said, come follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. And it said they left everything and followed him. They walked away from the boat full of fish.
In that thing, it said that the nets were breaking, and here it specifically says the net did not break.
The nets didn't break. That's interesting. That's an interesting contrast and difference. So one possibility is, and I don't know, I'm going to go ahead and tell you right up front, I don't know which of these is the real meaning of it, okay? But it is possible, and I think that you could argue from the context that there's a clue that says that maybe he's asking him, you're going to have to choose between me and fishing. Like Peter had already done before, that's possible. What's another way to read the question? If he's not talking about fishing, what's something else he might be asking Peter? Yeah. So if it's talking about the apostles, then how would you word the question? Because there's two ways to take it even that way. So let's say he's talking about the apostles. What's he asking him?
Does Peter care about him more than the other 11?
More than Peter cares about the 11? Yeah. So this is another way that Jesus might be asking him, do you love me more than you love these other men? Right? That's probably the most common reading of it, and I think that's probably the way I'd always read it when I was growing up, and maybe I see some people nodding. So it's possible that Jesus is asking Peter, do you love me more than you love these other men? Right? Am I number one in terms of priority? And that you could argue from passages where Jesus says, whoever loves father, daughter, son more than me is not worthy of me. So Jesus has said in other contexts that your love for him must supersede every other human relationship. And then there's a third way to read the question. Can anybody think of another way? Yeah. Do you love me more than they love me? You can read it that way. Do you love me more than these? In other words, remember Peter had said before the crucifixion, even if they all fall away, I will never fall away. Sort of like, putting himself on a different plane, which was obviously proven not to be true. But it's possible that Jesus is saying, do you love me more than they love me? Which seems to me to be a little bit of an unfair question. So I lean away from that one, and I kind of lean toward one of the other two. Do you love me more than you love these other guys, or do you love me more than fishing? And I don't know. I'll just go ahead and say I don't know which one he means. Anybody want to share any thoughts on if you think there's a strong reason to lean one way or the other? I don't know that we have to settle it. I think the lesson's going to be the same either way. I just think it's an interesting question as far as what does Jesus mean by that. Yes.
Is it possible that he means the question differently since he asked it 3 times, that he's not just asking one question?
Like, is what he's saying changing meanings as he's asking? Yeah, it's possible that. Yeah, I don't know. Possible. Some people see a lot of significance in the word love that's translated, that he's asking different, this agape, phileo kind of thing. I'm not sure if that's. Some people see a lot of significance in that, and I'm not sure if that's significant. I don't know. I don't know. Anybody else? Daniel, were you raising your hand? Oh, I thought so. I'll move it back there. Anybody else? Okay. So, Peter's response is, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He doesn't actually say, I love you more than these, right? And so maybe he's not going to say he loves him more than the other disciples love him, or he loves him more. He just says, you know that I love you. And he says to him, feed my lambs. He says a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? This time he doesn't say more than these others. He just says, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter's grieved because he says to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. So most people see a significance here in the fact that Jesus asked 3 times. What would we connect that with? 3 denials, right? Is he denials in a way by reaffirming 3 times his love for the Lord? It seems like probably so. Each time Peter reaffirms that he does love Jesus, what does Jesus tell him? Yeah. What do you think that's telling Peter?
If you love me, you got to put the work in.
You got to work. Yes, you got to if you love me, I've got a job for you, right? If you love me, you got to put work in. What else is it telling Peter, do you think? If you're Peter, what do you take away from that? Yeah, yes. He's still got a job for him, right? I think it's hard to overstate how difficult it must have been for Peter after he denied Jesus. I can't really even, I guess we all should be able to relate to that because we've all denied him in our own way, But, anytime we sin, we in a sense, are denying him. But for Peter, who after declaring to Jesus, I will die tonight, and no, it doesn't matter what happens, and then within the hours to be cursing and telling people he didn't know who Jesus was. And now he's supposed to be, how? How is he now going to go out in the world and be an apostle? How is he going to go be an ambassador for Jesus when he had a test and he completely failed it in the biggest way possible? how could he be of any use to Jesus now? He had publicly told people he didn't even know who Jesus was. What good is he to the Lord? I'm sure he had some of those thoughts. I don't know how a human being wouldn't be thinking those things. Like, well, I guess, I failed. I blew it. But for Jesus to tell him 3 times, feed my sheep, I think reaffirms that the Lord has a very important job for him, that he accepts him back. And by the end of this, I would suggest the whole matter's behind him now, right? By the end of this conversation, which was a tough conversation, it says Peter was grieved during the conversation. I mean, it was probably a very painful thing. This needed to happen. And it was probably a very healing kind of conversation to get through, to touch on the thing that maybe they had not touched on before this. When Jesus appeared to the 12, when Jesus had appeared to them in the upper room, and Peter's there, I wonder what Peter was thinking. Again, he must have had some really mixed feelings, and maybe they've never been able to have this conversation about what happened that night. And now by the end of this, Peter's place is reestablished. The Lord has accepted him. Peter's reaffirmed his love for the Lord. Jesus has a job for him. Any thoughts about that before we continue? Verse 18. So now Jesus makes a prophecy. What prophecy does he give? What does he foretell?
How Peter would die.
Yeah. And what do we learn about how Peter's going to die?
Stretch out your hand. I will stretch you. Arms outstretched.
Yeah. What does that sure sound like? Yeah. And from secular history, we believe Peter was crucified. The tradition tells us that how was he crucified? Yeah, he felt unworthy to be crucified like Jesus, so he asked to be crucified upside down. That's not in our scriptures. That's just what his tradition sort of has passed down. But John clearly tells us in verse 19, this was to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. After saying this, he said to him, follow me. How does the Luke 5 account end? Same way, right? Remember what we read in Luke 5? Isn't that neat? So you have a deja vu kind of situation here. Bookends of Peter's time with the Lord. From the day he was called to be a disciple, and now the day he's reaffirmed as a disciple, the same miracle, like a repeat miracle, and the same conclusion of that Peter's walking away from a bunch of fish and following the Lord, just like he did in Luke chapter 5. Anybody else down through that verse 19? Okay, verse 20. Peter sees John following, and what does he say?
What about this guy?
What about him? Why would he maybe ask that? Yeah. He was just told something very important about himself. It was about something's going to happen to him, right? Right. Well, what about him? And what does Jesus say?
What does it matter what happens to him? You follow me.
Do we need to know that sometimes? How often do we wonder, what about him? What about her? Huh? Yeah, that's right. I think Jesus would probably tell us the same thing. You follow me, right? But how often are we thinking about, what about that guy? What about him? What about somebody else? It's very human nature of Peter to be curious about that, but almost comical too, given the scene and all that, how important and these big things that are being said. Why is he thinking about John? It's just kind of what we do, right? But very gently, I think Jesus sort of rebukes him. It's not he doesn't seem to be angry, but he just sort of says, it doesn't matter really. If it's my will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? It's pretty blunt. And so this started a rumor. What rumor did that start? that John would never die. Now, there's two versions of thoughts on when John wrote his gospel. Probably the most widely held is that he wrote near the end of the first century and around the year 90. There is another thought that he wrote before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. And I don't know which is true. I really don't know. But if the more traditional view is that he was on the Isle of Patmos, remember Revelation and all that at the end of it all. So if he writes his gospel later on, there's also, tradition tells us that every other one of the apostles died a violent death for their faith, for preaching the gospel, except John. Tradition would tell us that John was the only one that died of old age. So imagine if you're John and you're 80, 90 years old, and all the other 11 were gone. Paul, dead. Peter, dead. James, Thaddeus, all of them. You're the last one, and you're still here. And so this word goes around, this rumor goes around. Didn't Jesus say something about John never dying? And so as he's closing out the book, he didn't say I would never die. He said, what is it to you? He has to kind of clarify exactly what Jesus said. Jesus didn't say that he would never die, but that rumor had gone around. You can almost imagine people looking at John and being like, he ain't never going to die. Everybody else is long gone, and John's still here. And it does seem that he outlived all the others. And I wonder if he had some funny feelings about that. But, we don't know. So, concluding 24 and 25, this is the disciple who's bearing witness about these things, who has written these things. We know this testimony is true. Now, there are many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books that would be written.
That's what stands out to me.
Yeah, talk about it.
Because I think it's one of the few instances, the Bible being inspired by the Spirit, I think it's one of the few instances of kind of editorializing within the Bible where it's like putting in a personal opinion of just, and it also just tells you I can't wait to get to heaven and find out what he did. The other stuff.
Imagine all the miracles that we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine one of those disciples who had been there with him, and you're just sitting there like, where would you even start if you're going to write this story? And they could just probably immediately imagine so many things that it would fill up multiple volumes of this to just start writing all the things that he taught and the things that he said and the way that he answered people, the miracles, the healings, the demons.
Well, you also think John wrote the end of Revelation where, he's seen all this stuff and he's like, come Lord Jesus, he's ready for it.
Yeah. All right. That's how Revelation ends. That's how that's how our New Testament ends. Come Lord Jesus. He was ready, right? Maybe his way of glorifying God was to live a long time and, serve the Lord faithfully for all those years and write these books. Any other thoughts? Where time's about up? All right, so Lord willing, next week, Stephen Russell, survey of the Psalms, and be thinking about, if you have any suggestions. I have had a suggestion. If you have any other suggestions, if you have any suggestions on topics to study after the Wednesday night series, we'll be resuming our class in Wednesday. So thank you very much.
November. Did I say Wednesday?